Alien nurse stunned by a mysterious pulse in her human pilot patient. What would you do if you were an alien healer, tending to a rugged human pilot, only to stumble upon a strange, pulsing mystery that defies everything you've ever known? Today, your guide from the Sci-Fi Nebula channel, will plunge you into a gripping tale aboard the Nostromo Dawn, a story where science meets seduction, and a single heartbeat could unravel the secrets of the universe. Stay with us until the end, because the twists will leave you speechless. Before we launch into this cosmic adventure, please smash that like button and subscribe to help us hit 1,000 subscribers fast. Your support is the spark that ignites our wildest stories. Got a sci-fi idea you're dying to see? Drop it in the comments, or just hit us with a 1 if this hooks you, or a 0 if we need to crank up the thrills. Ready? Let's dive into the electrifying unknown of space. Chapter 1: The Unexpected Discovery. The Nostromo Dawn sliced through the void of space, a sleek silver leviathan drifting among the stars. Its hull gleamed faintly under the distant glow of a crimson nebula, a swirling tapestry of light that painted the cosmos in hues of blood and fire. Inside, the ship thrummed with quiet purpose, a vessel of exploration, crewed by beings from across the galaxy, united in their quest to chart the uncharted. For weeks, they had ventured deeper into the frontier, a region where the maps ended and the unknown began. It was a place of wonder, danger, and, for Elara Ripley, endless fascination. Elara stood in the ship's medical bay, her silvery skin catching the sterile blue light of the overhead panels. Her violet eyes, deep and luminous, flickered over the unconscious form before her. She brushed a strand of opalescent hair behind her pointed ear, her slender fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of discovery. As a xenobiologist, she lived for moments like this, the chance to study a species new to her, to unravel the mysteries of its form and function. And today, that species was human. The man on the table was Jaxon Kane, a pilot from a human expedition vessel that had collided with a rogue asteroid swarm. His ship had been reduced to a drifting wreck, its crew lost to the void, except for him. The Nostromo Dawn had intercepted his distress signal just in time, pulling his battered escape pod from the wreckage. Now, he lay still, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. His chestnut hair was matted with sweat, a faint stubble shadowing his sharp jawline. To Elara, he was an enigma, a puzzle wrapped in flesh and bone. Humans were rare in this sector of the galaxy, their presence a novelty that stirred whispers among the crew. Status? Elara asked, her voice soft but steady as she glanced at the holographic chart hovering beside her. The lead medic, a wiry insectoid named Crix, clicked his mandibles in response. Stable, but barely. Took a nasty hit to the head when his pod ejected. He'll be out for a while. Standard protocol, clean him up, monitor vitals. Elara nodded, her gaze lingering on Jackson's face. There was something striking about him, something that tugged at her curiosity beyond the clinical detachment of her role. His features were rugged yet refined, so unlike the fluid, ethereal lines of her own people. She wondered what stories lay behind those closed eyes, what battles had forged the scars that crisscrossed his hands. Shaking off the thought, she gathered her tools, a sonic scanner, a basin of cleansing gel, and a soft neural cloth. Duty first, she reminded herself. Always duty. She began her work methodically, running the scanner over his body to map his injuries. The device hummed, projecting a lattice of green light across his skin. Bruises bloomed purple along his ribs, a hairline fracture traced his left forearm, but nothing life-threatening. Satisfied, she dipped the cloth into the gel and started to clean him, her movements precise yet gentle. The gel shimmered as it dissolved the grime of his ordeal, revealing the taut lines of muscle beneath. Elara's breath caught as she traced the contours of his arms, marveling at their solidity. Her own species, the Lurani, were lithe and delicate, built for grace rather than strength. Jaxon was different, raw, powerful, almost primal. Her hands moved lower, gliding over the planes of his chest, then down to his legs. She focused on the task, her mind cataloging every detail, the texture of his skin, the faint warmth radiating from him. And then, by the stars, she froze. Between his legs, something shifted. A subtle pulse at first, then a growing tension, a swelling that strained against the fabric of his torn flight suit. Elara's eyes widened, her heart slamming against her ribs. In all her studies, all her years of dissecting alien anatomies, she had never encountered anything like this. It was rapid, alarming, alive with some unknown energy. "Something's wrong," she gasped, stumbling back a step. The cloth slipped from her fingers, splashing gel onto the floor. Panic clawed at her throat as she fumbled for her communicator. "Crix. Get in here, now. I think he's dying." The medic skittered into the room, his compound eyes glinting with alarm. "What is it? What's happening?" Elara pointed, her hand trembling. "There, look. It's growing. Some kind of reaction, a rupture maybe, I don't know." Crix leaned over Jaxon, his mandibles twitching as he assessed the situation. Then, to Elara's utter bewilderment, he let out a chittering laugh, a sound that echoed through the bay like breaking glass. Moments later, the rest of the medical team crowded in, their voices rising in a chorus of amusement. A feathered technician named Silra doubled over, her wings fluttering with mirth. "Oh, Elara," Crix managed between clicks, "that's no rupture. That's just, how do the humans put it?" His little pilot, waking up. Elara blinked, her cheeks flushing a deep indigo. "His what?" Silra wiped a tear from her eye, still chuckling. "It's a human thing, dear. Perfectly normal. Happens when they're stimulated. Congratulations, you've got quite the touch." The room erupted again, and Elara felt heat flood her face, a mix of mortification and confusion. She straightened, clutching the edge of the table for support, determined to salvage her dignity. "I see," she said stiffly, forcing her voice to steady. "A biological response. Noted. Let's proceed." She returned to her task, pointedly ignoring the snickers behind her. Yet as she worked, her eyes kept darting back to that strange, mysterious part of him. Questions swirled in her mind, scientific ones, yes, but also something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. Humans were more complex than she'd imagined, more intriguing. And Jaxon Kane, with his quiet strength and unexpected vitality, was the most fascinating specimen of all.
Days passed, and Elara found herself drawn back to the medical bay more often than necessary. She told herself it was professional diligence, a need to ensure his recovery. But late one night, as she adjusted the neural monitor above his head, his eyes fluttered open. They were a stormy gray, sharp and piercing, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Where am I?" His voice was rough, gravelly from disuse, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. Elara swallowed, her pulse racing. "You're safe. Aboard the Nostromo Dawn. Your ship was destroyed, but we rescued you. We've been tending to you." A faint smile curved his lips, softening the hard edges of his face. "Guess I owe you my life then. What's your name, Angel?" Her blush deepened, the unfamiliar word sparking a warmth in her chest. Elara Ripley. "And I'm no angel, just a scientist." "Elara," he repeated, tasting the syllables. "Well, you look like something divine to me." She wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or charm speaking, but the sincerity in his gaze unraveled her composure. Before she could respond, Crix bustled in, breaking the moment with a clatter of tools. "Awake at last, are we? Good, let's run some tests." Jaxon's eyes lingered on her a moment longer, a flicker of mischief dancing in them. "Guess I'll see you around, Elara. Gotta say, I'm looking forward to it." As Crix ushered her out, Elara's mind spun. She stepped into the corridor, the nebulous glow bathing her in crimson light, and pressed a hand to her racing heart. Something had shifted, something vast and uncharted, like the stars beyond the ship. Jaxon Kane was no longer just a subject of study. He was a pulse in the darkness, a mystery she couldn't resist exploring.
Chapter 2, Those First Touches. The Nostromo Dawn glided through the heart of the Seraphine Nebula, its corridors bathed in a kaleidoscope of colors that spilled through the massive observation windows. Tendrils of violet and gold swirled outside, a cosmic dance of gas and dust that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Inside the ship's recovery chamber, however, the air was thick with a different kind of energy, one that crackled between Elara Ripley and Jaxon Kane, fragile yet undeniable. Elara stood beside a low-gravity platform, her silvery fingers adjusting the settings on a rehabilitation drone. The device hummed softly, its tiny thrusters glowing as it hovered above Jaxon, who lay sprawled across the padded surface. He was awake now, his gray eyes tracking her every move with a mixture of curiosity and something hotter, something that made her pulse quicken. His injuries were healing, slowly, but steadily, thanks to the ship's advanced medical tech and her meticulous care. Today marked the start of his physical rehabilitation, a process she'd volunteered to oversee. Duty, she'd told herself. Nothing more. Ready? She asked, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She kept her gaze on the drone's control panel, avoiding those stormy eyes that seemed to see right through her. Jaxon grinned, a lopsided curve of his lips that sent a jolt through her. As I'll ever be, document. Let's see if these legs still work. She bristled slightly at the nickname, Doc, but let it slide. I'm not a doctor, just a xenobiologist. And we're starting small. Lift this. She handed him a lightweight resistance orb, its surface shimmering with a faint blue glow. Squeeze it 10 times, then rest. He took the orb, his calloused fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. The contact was electric, a spark that raced up her arm and settled somewhere deep in her core. Elara pulled back quickly, pretending to adjust the drone, but she felt his gaze linger, heavy and warm. He squeezed the orb with exaggerated effort, grunting as if it weighed a ton. You're a tough one, Elara. Gonna make me sweat for it, huh? It's for your own good, she replied, forcing a clinical tone. Your muscles need to rebuild after the trauma. Now focus. He chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through the room, and complied. As he worked, Elara guided the drone to scan his vitals, its beams painting his form in soft light. She couldn't help but notice the way his flight suit clung to him, outlining the broad expanse of his shoulders, the lean strength of his thighs. Her people were built for elegance, their bodies fluid and light. Jaxon was solid, grounded, a force of nature in human skin. She wondered what it would feel like to be held by him, to feel that strength envelop her. The thought came unbidden, and she shook her head, chiding herself silently. Focus. The session progressed, moving from the orb to simple stretches. Elara positioned herself beside him, her hands hovering near his arm as he extended it upward. Good, she murmured. Now the other side. Slowly. He obeyed, but as he reached out, his balance faltered, still unsteady from weeks of unconsciousness. His body tipped toward her, and instinctively, she caught him, her palms pressing against his chest. Time seemed to slow. His heartbeat thudded beneath her fingers, strong and wild, a rhythm that echoed in her own veins. His breath brushed her neck, warm and ragged, and for a moment, their faces were inches apart. She could see the flecks of silver in his eyes, the faint scar tracing his brow. His lips parted, and she felt herself leaning in, drawn by a pull she couldn't name. A sharp chime shattered the silence, the ship's alert system signaling a minor course correction. Elara jerked back, her cheeks flaring indigo as she steadied him against the platform. Careful, she said, her voice an octave too high. You're not ready for sudden moves. Jackson's grin returned, unrepentant. Guess I need more practice falling into your arms, huh? She rolled her eyes, stepping away to recalibrate the drone. You need more practice following instructions, pilot. Let's try standing now. He swung his legs off the platform, gripping its edge as he rose. Elara moved to his side, her hand resting lightly on his elbow to guide him. The contact was necessary, professional, but it didn't stop her skin from tingling where it met his. He took a tentative step, then another, his jaw tight with concentration. She matched his pace, her fingers sliding to his shoulder when he wobbled. "You're doing well," she said softly, meaning it. "Better than I expected." "Got a good teacher," he replied, his voice low. He turned his head, catching her gaze, and the air thickened again. "You've got steady hands, Elara. Gentle, too. Makes a guy feel safe." The compliment caught her off guard, stirring a warmth she couldn't suppress. "It's my job," she said, but the words felt hollow. She wasn't just doing her job, not anymore. There was something about Jaxon, something that tugged at her beyond charts and scans. His resilience, his quiet humor, the way he looked at her like she was more than a scientist in a sterile lab. They continued the exercises, transitioning to a low-gravity walk along the chamber's perimeter. The nebula's light streamed through the windows, casting them in a surreal glow, her silver skin shimmering, his human tones softened by the hues of space. Each step brought their bodies closer, their movements sinking in a way that felt almost choreographed. At one point, her hand brushed his lower back, adjusting his posture, and he tensed, a sharp intake of breath escaping him. She froze, realizing how intimate the touch had been, how her fingers had lingered. "Problem?" she asked, pulling back, her voice tight. He turned to face her fully, his expression shifting, less playful now, more unguarded. "No problem. Just, you're making it hard to focus, Elara." Her throat tightened, a dozen responses warring in her mind. Before she could choose one, he took a step closer, closing the distance she tried to maintain. His hand grazed her arm, a mirror of her earlier touch, and her breath hitched. The chamber felt smaller, the nebula's glow more intense, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She should pull away. She had to pull away. But her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot by the heat in his eyes. "Jaxon," she whispered, a warning or a plea, she wasn't sure which. He leaned in, his voice a husky murmur. "Tell me to stop, and I will." She didn't. Couldn't. Her lips parted, and a sudden jolt rocked the ship, the floor tilting as the alert system blared again. Elara stumbled, and Jaxon caught her this time, his arms wrapping around her waist. They steadied each other, panting, the moment broken but not erased. The intercom crackled, minor turbulence from the nebula. "All crew, stand by." Elara extricated herself, her face burning. "We should finish this later," she said, smoothing her tunic with shaking hands. Jaxon nodded, but his eyes held a promise. "Later it is." "I'm not going anywhere, Elara." She fled the chamber, the nebula's colors swirling around her like a storm of her own making. Her heart pounded, a wild rhythm she couldn't quiet. Duty, she told herself. Just duty. But as she glanced back through the closing door, seeing Jaxon's silhouette against the starry expanse, she knew it was a lie. Those touches, those fleeting moments, had ignited something within her. Something dangerous. Something alive. And Jaxon Kane, with his roguish grin and steady hands, wasn't about to let it fade. Chapter 3, Secrets Beneath the Stars. The Nostromo Dawn hung suspended in the velvet black of space, its engines quiet as it orbited a jagged, amber-hued planet. The ship's hull reflected the faint shimmer of the world below, a desolate sphere of cracked stone and swirling dust storms. Inside, the crew buzzed with purpose, deploying probes to collect samples from the surface. But for Elara Ripley, the real exploration was happening elsewhere, deep within the ship's data archives, where secrets whispered to her in the glow of flickering screens. She stood alone in the archival chamber, a cavernous space lined with crystalline panels that pulsed with stored knowledge. The air was cool, tinged with the faint ozone scent of machinery, and the only sound was the soft hum of the system as it powered her search. Elara's violet eyes glinted with determination, her silvery fingers dancing over a holographic interface. She'd come here on a whim, seeking a reference on human physiology to better understand Jaxon's recovery. What she'd found instead was a hidden trove, files buried in an obscure subdirectory, labeled simply Homo sapiens, cultural and biological notes. Curiosity, her oldest companion, had pulled her in. The first file was clinical, skeletal structures, metabolic rates, neural pathways. But as she scrolled deeper, the data shifted. Diagrams gave way to text, vivid, evocative accounts of human behavior, emotions, and something called physical intimacy. Elara's breath caught as she opened a subsection titled Expressions of Desire. Words leapt out at her: touch, heat, connection. There were illustrations too, stylized, yet unmistakable, depicting humans entwined, their bodies pressed close in ways that sent a flush creeping up her neck. Her Lurani upbringing had taught her about reproduction, yes, but this was different. This was raw, visceral, alive. She leaned closer, her heart thudding against her ribs. The text described how humans use touch to communicate longing, how their bodies responded with heat and tension, like that strange pulse she'd seen in Jaxon days ago. A memory flashed, her hands on his chest, his breath against her skin, the way her own pulse had quickened. Was that what this was? Desire? The thought thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. She snapped the interface shut, her cheeks burning indigo, but the seed had been planted. She couldn't unsee it, couldn't unfeel it. The next day, Elara entered the recovery chamber with a new awareness simmering beneath her calm exterior. Jaxon was already there, stretching under the drone's gentle guidance, his flight suit taut against his frame. The nebula's light had faded, replaced by the planet's ochre glow streaming through the windows. He glanced up as she approached, his gray eyes sparking with that familiar mischief. "Morning, Elara. Ready to put me through my paces?" She forced a smile, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Always. Let's start with some resistance stretches. Arm first, extend it fully." He complied, his muscles flexing as he reached out. Elara stepped closer, her hand brushing his forearm to adjust his angle. The contact lingered, a heartbeat too long, and she felt it again, that electric jolt, sharper now, fueled by the images still dancing in her mind. She cleared her throat, focusing on the drone's readings. Good. Now the other side. As he moved, she let her touch drift, her fingers tracing the line of his bicep with a deliberate slowness she hadn't dared before. His breath hitched, a subtle sound that sent a thrill through her. "You're getting stronger," she murmured, her voice dropping to a softer, huskier tone. "I can feel it." Jackson's grin widened, but his eyes darkened, catching the shift in her. "Yeah. Guess I've got a good motivator. You're not half bad at this, you know." She met his gaze, emboldened by the heat she saw there. "I've been studying. Learning how humans recover. How they move." Her hand slid to his shoulder, guiding him into the next stretch, and she leaned in just enough for her breath to graze his ear. "You're full of surprises, Jaxon." He turned his head, their faces inches apart. "You've got no idea, Elara. Keep that up, and I might show you a few more." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken promises. She should stop, should pull back to the safety of professionalism, but the pull was too strong. The files had unlocked something in her, a hunger to understand him not just as a scientist, but as a woman. They continued the session, her touches growing bolder, his responses more unguarded. A brush against his chest here, a linger on his waist there, each contact a spark threatening to ignite. Then, as the session neared its end, Jaxon grabbed her wrist mid-stretch, pulling her into a shadowed corner of the chamber. The drone whirred obliviously above, its light missing them as he pressed her against the wall. "You're playing a dangerous game," he whispered, his voice rough with want. "And I'm not complaining." Her heart raced, but she didn't resist. "Maybe I'm tired of playing safe," she breathed, her violet eyes locking onto his. He kissed her then, hard, fierce, a collision of need that stole the air from her lungs. Her hands found his chest, clutching at the fabric of his suit as she melted into him. His lips were warm, insistent, tasting faintly of salt and metal, and she felt that pulse again, not just in him, but in herself, a wild rhythm echoing through her veins. The planet's amber light bathed them, casting their shadows long and tangled against the wall. They broke apart when footsteps echoed from the corridor, sharp, deliberate, cutting through their haze. Elara pulled back, her chest heaving, and Jaxon straightened, his grin returning but softer now, almost tender. "Guess we've got a secret to keep," he murmured, brushing a thumb across her cheek. She nodded, still breathless. "For now. We can't, not yet." He stepped back, respecting her retreat, but his eyes promised more. "Whenever you're ready, Elara. I'll wait." She fled the chamber, her mind a whirlwind of heat and guilt. The kiss lingered on her lips, a phantom touch she couldn't shake as she made her way to her quarters. She'd crossed a line, one she'd drawn herself, and yet she didn't regret it. Jaxon was a mystery she was unraveling, piece by heated piece, and she wanted more. But she wasn't the only one watching. From the shadows of the corridor, Dr. Tarkin Vex observed, his angular face set in a scowl. The senior researcher had noticed Elara's frequent visits to the recovery chamber, her lingering glances at the human. His golden eyes narrowed, glinting with suspicion. He'd always mistrusted outsiders, humans especially, and now he had a target. Elara Ripley was slipping, and he intended to catch her fall. As she disappeared around a corner, Tarkin tapped a command into his wrist device, summoning a surveillance log. "Let's see what you're hiding, Ripley," he muttered, his voice a cold hiss. "No one jeopardizes this mission, not on my watch." Outside, the amber planet loomed, its storms raging silently against the void. Inside, a different storm was brewing, one of passion, secrets, and the sharp edge of discovery. Elara felt it in her bones, a tremor that promised both danger and delight. And beneath the stars, she knew she was no longer just a scientist. She was a woman falling, fast and unafraid, into the unknown.
Chapter 4, Confrontation Under Pressure. The Nostromo Dawn shuddered as it plunged deeper into the Seraphine Nebula's outer fringes, where magnetic storms raged like living things. Streams of violet plasma lashed against the ship's shields, sending tremors through its decks. Inside the control room, the crew worked in a flurry, lights flickered, consoles beeped, and the air crackled with static. The storm had come without warning, a chaotic symphony of nature that tested the ship's resilience and the nerves of everyone aboard. For Elara Ripley, however, the real tempest was brewing within her, a storm of emotion that threatened to break free. She stood beside Jaxon in the recovery chamber, her silvery hands guiding him through a series of stretches. The planet's amber glow had vanished, swallowed by the nebula's swirling chaos, and the windows now framed a tempest of light and shadow. Jackson's recovery had progressed. His steps were surer, his strength returning, but the tension between them had only grown. Every touch, every glance carried the weight of their stolen kiss, a secret they'd buried beneath layers of professionalism. Yet beneath the surface, it simmered, ready to boil over. "Lift your arm higher," Elara instructed, her voice firm but soft. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his elbow, then sliding to his shoulder. The contact was deliberate now, a quiet rebellion against the boundaries she'd once clung to. His skin was warm under her touch, a contrast to the cool air of the chamber, and she felt that familiar jolt, sharp, electric, undeniable. Jaxon obeyed, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "You're pushing me today," he said, a teasing edge to his tone. "Trying to wear me out?" She allowed herself a small smile. "You can handle it. You've come too far to slack off now." He chuckled, a low sound that vibrated through her. "Oh, I can handle a lot more than this, Elara. Just say the word." Her breath caught, the invitation hanging between them like a live wire. She should pull back, should retreat to the safety of protocol, but the storm outside seemed to mirror the one within her, urging her forward. Her hand lingered on his shoulder, her thumb tracing a slow circle, and his gaze darkened, pupils dilating with a hunger that matched her own. The drone hummed above, oblivious as the space between them shrank. Then the ship lurched violently, a wave of magnetic force slamming into its hull. Elara stumbled and Jaxon caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist. They steadied each other, pressed close, their breaths mingling in the flickering light. Her hands gripped his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart, and for a moment the chaos outside faded. There was only him, his warmth, his strength, the way he looked at her like she was the center of his universe. "Jaxon," she whispered, her voice trembling with everything she couldn't say. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "I've got you, Elara. Always will." The door hissed open before she could respond, and a shadow fell across them. Dr. Tarkin Vex strode into the chamber, his golden eyes glinting with cold fury. His angular frame was rigid, his black tunic pristine despite the ship's turmoil. Elara pulled away from Jaxon, her heart sinking as Tarkin's gaze swept over them, sharp and accusing. "Ripley," he snapped, his voice cutting through the hum of the storm. "What exactly is happening here?" She straightened, forcing calm into her tone. "Rehabilitation exercises, Dr. Vex. Jackson's making excellent progress." "Don't insult my intelligence," Tarkin interrupted, stepping closer. His eyes flicked to Jaxon, then back to her, narrowing with suspicion. "I've watched you, Ripley." The lingering touches, the whispered exchanges. "This isn't science, it's fraternization. You're compromising this mission with your infatuation." Elara's cheeks flared indigo, but she held her ground. "You're mistaken. My work with Jaxon has been strictly professional." "Enough." Tarkin's voice rose, a whip crack of authority. "I've seen the logs, your late-night visits, your sessions that stretch beyond regulation. You think I'm blind to what's happening under my nose?" Jaxon stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Back off, Vex. Elara's done nothing wrong. If you've got a problem, take it up with me." Tarkin sneered, his lip curling. "Oh, I will, human. You're a liability, a reckless pilot who's ensnared one of our best researchers. I'll have you confined to quarters and Ripley disciplined. This ends now." Panic clawed at Elara's throat. She couldn't lose Jaxon, not after everything they'd shared, everything they'd fought for. She opened her mouth to protest, but Jaxon spoke first, his voice steady and resolute. "Dr. Vex, I get your rules. I get your concerns. But here's the truth, Elara's the reason I'm standing here. Her care, her dedication, it's kept me going. And yeah, I care about her too. More than I should. If that's a crime, then punish me. But don't you dare take this out on her." Tarkin's face twisted with rage, his golden eyes blazing. "You insolent. Stand down, Tarkin." A new voice cut through the tension, firm and unwavering. All eyes turned to the doorway where Captain Leia Saren stood, her presence commanding despite her petite stature. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, her blue eyes piercing as they assessed the scene. The storm's light framed her, casting her shadow long and steady. Tarkin bristled, but he held his tongue as Leia stepped forward. "I've been monitoring this situation," she said, her gaze shifting between Elara and Jaxon. "And I've seen no evidence that Ripley's actions have endangered this crew or this mission. If anything, her work with Kane has been exemplary, his recovery is proof of that. But the protocols," Tarkin began, his voice tight. Leia raised a hand, silencing him. "Protocols exist to protect us, not to chain us. I've watched these two. Their bond hasn't weakened them, it's made them stronger. Kane's healing faster than projected, and Ripley's focus hasn't wavered. If they've found something personal amidst this chaos, who are we to judge?" Elara's chest tightened, a wave of relief crashing over her. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back, her hand finding Jaxon's. He squeezed it, his warmth grounding her as Tarkin sputtered, his face darkening with indignation. "This is outrageous," he hissed. "You're condoning?" "I'm condoning nothing," Leia snapped, her tone steel. "I'm recognizing reality. As long as they maintain discipline on duty, their personal lives are their own. You want to waste time on a witch hunt, Tarkin? Do it after we've survived this storm." Tarkin's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists. For a moment, it seemed he might argue further, but Leia's stare held him in place. With a final glare at Elara and Jaxon, he turned on his heel and stormed out, the door hissing shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant rumble of the storm. Leia turned to them, a faint smile softening her features. "You two tread carefully. Not everyone's as understanding as I am. But for what it's worth, Kane, I expect you back in that pilot seat soon. We need you." Jaxon nodded, gratitude in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Won't let you down." As Leia left, Elara exhaled, her knees weak. Jaxon pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a fierce, protective embrace. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief and joy. "We're okay." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Told you I've got you, Elara? No one's tearing us apart, not Tarkin, not anyone." She laughed softly, a sound of release, and buried her face in his chest. The storm raged on outside, its fury rattling the ship, but within the chamber, a calm settled over them. Their love had faced its first trial and emerged unbroken. As the nebula's light flickered across their entwined forms, Elara felt a certainty bloom within her. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together, stronger, bolder, and unafraid.
Chapter 5, A Promise Beyond the Galaxy. The Nostromo Dawn emerged from the Seraphine Nebula's turbulent embrace, its hull scarred but unbroken. The storm had passed, leaving behind a tranquil expanse of stars that glittered like scattered jewels against the infinite black. The crew had gathered on the observation deck for a rare moment of celebration, a small ceremony to mark the mission's success in charting the nebula's edge and collecting vital data from the amber planet. Laughter and music filled the air, a soft melody weaving through the hum of conversation. But for Elara Ripley and Jaxon Kane, the night held a deeper promise, one that shimmered just beyond the horizon of the stars. Elara stood near the edge of the deck, her silvery skin glowing faintly under the ambient light. The massive viewport stretched before her, a curved wall of reinforced crystal that framed the cosmos in breathtaking clarity. She wore a simple tunic, its fabric shimmering like liquid starlight, a subtle nod to the occasion. Her violet eyes traced the constellations beyond, her mind drifting to the journey that had brought her here, not just through space, but through the uncharted territory of her own heart. Jaxon had changed everything, turning her orderly world into something wild, beautiful, and utterly alive. She felt him before she saw him, a shift in the air, a warmth that drew her like gravity. Jaxon approached, his step steady now, the limp of his recovery replaced by the confident stride of a man reborn. His flight suit had been swapped for a dark jacket, its cut sharp yet casual, accentuating the broad lines of his shoulders. His gray eyes found hers, and a smile tugged at his lips, soft, knowing, and brimming with intent. He'd been quieter these past few days, his usual teasing tempered by something deeper. She'd wondered why, but now, as he took her hand, she sensed it, a secret ready to unfold. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and warm, laced with a nervous edge she hadn't heard before. "Got something to show you." Elara tilted her head, curiosity sparking. "What's this about, Jaxon?" He grinned, tugging her gently. "Patience, Elara. You'll see." He led her through the crowd, past crewmates who offered nods and knowing smiles. The deck was alive with light, strings of microluminaries draped along the railings, their glow pulsing in time with the music. As they reached the center of the viewport, the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the room. Elara's breath caught as the stars beyond the glass began to shift, not naturally, but deliberately, their patterns rearranging into a shimmering arc. The crew had rigged the ship's projectors, bending the starlight into a canopy that arched overhead, a celestial dome of brilliance. "Jaxon," she breathed, her voice trembling with wonder. "What is this?" He turned to face her, his hand still clasping hers. The crowd parted, forming a loose circle around them, and she realized this was no spontaneous gesture, it was planned, orchestrated with care. Her heart thudded, a wild rhythm that echoed the pulse she'd first felt in him all those weeks ago. He took a deep breath, his gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "Elara Ripley," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "From the moment I woke up on this ship, half dead and lost, you were there. Your face was the first thing I saw, those eyes, that light, and I knew I was in trouble. Not because of the crash, but because you got under my skin in a way I couldn't shake." A soft laugh rippled through the crew, but Elara barely heard it. Her world narrowed to him, to the sincerity in his words, the way his thumb brushed her knuckles as he spoke. She felt tears prick her eyes, her chest tightening with a joy she couldn't name. "You didn't just save me," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "You challenged me. Pushed me. Made me want to be better, not just to fly again, but to be the kind of man who deserves you. Every touch, every look, every time you stood by me, it built something I never thought I'd find out here in the void. He released her hand, reaching into his jacket pocket. Her breath hitched as he pulled out a small, iridescent ring, a band of woven metal that shimmered with flecks of stardust, forged from fragments of the asteroid that had nearly claimed his life. He dropped to one knee, the starlight framing him like a halo, and the room fell utterly silent. Elara, I don't know what the galaxy's got in store for us, storms, planets, who knows what else. But I know I want to face it all with you. I want to wake up to your voice, fall asleep to your touch, explore every corner of this universe by your side. You're my star, my compass, my everything. Will you marry me? Be my partner, my love, my home, for as long as these stars keep burning. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable, as she stared at him. The ring gleamed in his hand, a symbol of their journey, of the chaos that had brought them together and the strength that had held them fast. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Yes, Jaxon. Yes, 1,000 times, yes." A cheer erupted from the crew, loud and joyous, but Elara barely registered it. Jaxon surged to his feet, slipping the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. It fit perfectly, its cool weight a promise against her skin. Then he pulled her into his arms, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss that was fierce, tender, and utterly consuming. She melted into him, her hands clutching his jacket, tasting salt and stardust as the galaxy spun around them. The stars above pulsed brighter, as if the universe itself rejoiced. When they parted, breathless and flushed, Jaxon grinned, a wicked, boyish glint in his eyes. "Gotta warn you, though," he murmured, loud enough for only her to hear. "I plan to keep surprising you with my pulses for the rest of our lives." Elara laughed, a sound of pure delight, and swatted his chest playfully. "You're impossible," she said, her cheeks flushing indigo. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." He pulled her close again, nuzzling her neck. "Good. 'Cause that first day, when you thought I was dying down there, it's part of us now. Our story." She smiled, resting her head against his chest. "A story that started with a shock and ended with a vow. I wouldn't change a thing." The crew surged forward then, offering congratulations and clinking glasses of lum wine, a glowing, effervescent drink that sparkled like the stars. Captain Leia Saren approached, her blue eyes warm with approval. "Well done, you two," she said, raising her glass. "To love that defies the odds, and a pilot who'd better be back in the cockpit soon." Jaxon saluted her with a grin. "Aye, Captain. With Elara by my side, I'll fly this ship to the edge of the galaxy and back." Later, as the celebration wound down, they slipped away to a quiet corner of the deck. The stars stretched endless before them, a vast canvas of possibility. Elara leaned into Jaxon, her hand tracing the ring on her finger, its glow a faint echo of the nebula they'd survived. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered. "We're going to build a life together, out there, among all that." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice rough with emotion. "Believe it, love. You're stuck with me now, storms, stars, and all." She tilted her head up, her violet eyes shining. "Good. Because I've got plans for you, pilot. Starting with a little exploration of my own." His laugh was a rumble, warm and deep, as he pulled her into another kiss. The stars bore witness, their light a silent vow that their journey, wild, unexpected, and boundless, had only just begun. And there you have it, we've raced through the electrifying saga of an alien nurse stunned by a mysterious pulse in her human pilot patient. From Elara Ripley's jaw-dropping discovery of Jaxon Kane's vital spark, through forbidden touches and cosmic storms, to a love that binds them across the stars, this journey has been a wild ride. Don't forget to slam that like button and subscribe to push us toward 1,000 subs. Your energy keeps the Sci-Fi Nebula channel blazing with epic tales like this. Catch you in the next pulse-pounding adventure.